Hey everybody, I'm Greg Soul and welcome to another CIQ tutorial. You thought I was going to say demo, you are incorrect. I'm doing a tutorial this time, or at least I'm going to call it a tutorial. It's really going to be, hey, let's figure this thing out together. So I'm going to do something I've wanted to do for a little bit, which is to write a playbook and record it and kind of hopefully edit down the process so it's not as painful. But I'm going to be doing some Googling and I'm going to be looking some stuff up because I can't keep everything in my brain. And I wanted you to see kind of the process I follow when I'm actually developing this stuff. Your mileage may vary. I'm going to go ahead and say that right out of the box. So what I'm going to be writing a playbook for today is a really quick, fast, dirty, simple playbook that will check for the XZ vulnerability, which is absolutely top of everybody's mind right now. Rocky Linux isn't affected. Otherwise, I would have really quickly put out a playbook that kind of demonstrated that. But I thought, hey, if it is, the next big CVE that hits, and I need to check all of my infrastructure to see if the XC version is, compatible with whatever the exploit was, right? Then I need to create a list of all of those, or, maybe create a list and do remediation, or just do remediation, or whatever your case happens to be. In this instance, I'm just going to be developing a playbook that's going to check all of my hosts in here, and it's going to evaluate, and I'm going to say it's going to develop a list of all of the compromised versions, but maybe I'll just do a list of everything, right? It's kind of in flux and process. So let's get started. I've got my Ascender here. I actually do my development through Ascender. When I say through, I mean I'm going to be running all my automation in Ascender. I'm actually going to be creating all of my playbooks in VS Code Studio. So let me pop over to my VS Code, Virtual Studio Code. So I have this connected to my public Git repository. So anything I create in here is going to be available to you, and you can look through the history and see how dirty these configurations were. But in here, I'm just going to right click, do new file, and we'll call it check XZ version.yml. Now, whenever you specify something as YML inside of VS Code, it actually will do syntax highlighting for YAML files. And so something I always say is whenever you're creating your YAML files, do spaces, do 2 spaces, don't hit the tab key. Now, if you create a file that's .yml inside of VS Code and you hit the tab key, guess what it's going to do? It's going to do 2 spaces. So I kind of eat my own words when I say that, but it's kind of a good practice to go ahead and get accustomed to just putting in spaces. So I tend to hit spaces. You'll probably hear that as I'm banging on the keyboard, but we're going to start out with our 3 dashes. They indicate it's a YAML file. I'll do .name. Technically, the name fields are usually optional. In my case, in my estimation, they are always mandatory. You should always be putting this in here because it's just documentation. And as you see the output when we run this thing pop out, it's actually going to display, well, what's the overall purpose of this? That's what the name portion up at the top is. I'm naming the play, right? A playbook could technically have multiple plays. I generally only have 1 play per, and so I will say generate a report on XZ versions. We'll call it that. Next, we're going to have the host portion. For now, I'll just say all. It's going to be my little placeholder. Gather _ facts. I'm going to do false on that, which is kind of my default go-to. I may end up using gathered facts, and I may turn this back off, or I might disable that right there or comment it out. But for now, my default is to always turn off gathered facts because that's going to slow down my operation a little bit if I don't need it. And I really don't think I am. So I always create a var section. So if I'm going to have any variables that are going to apply to all of the tasks in here, I put them up in the vars. Also use that for documentation. So and then I will add my task portion. And now I'll start doing some kind of pseudo coding. So I'll do name. And then what's the very first thing I want to do? I want to shell command to gather XZ version. Seems pretty straightforward. So I'm going to do that. After that, I will do let's just do a debug. Let's just spit out the contents of the variable to screen. That way it makes it a little bit easier to kind of see what's going on. So I will display XC. We'll call it XC version. That's what we're going to name the variable, XC version to screen. We'll just do that. So in here, I'm just going to issue a shell command that's going to be ansible.builtin.shell. Now notice that I indented in the module name right there to be in line with the name portion. So as you see, like at the beginning of my tasks, I have kind of that dash or minus, whatever you want to call that, because this is a list of tasks we're going to be operating under. And so everything's going to, for an individual task, will live under said task. So it needs to be indented in. So ansible.shell, and we will do XC dash version, and we're going to register this. So the register option basically says take all the output you get right here and stick it into this variable. So I'm going to say register the output to XC underscore version. That's going to be my variable name. We'll go ahead and put a space. After that, I will do ansible.builtin.debug. And I had two options here. I can do message and I can formulate a message, but for now I'm just going to spit it out to screen and I'll do var. And whenever you're using the var option, you don't use any double quotes or double curly braces. So in here, I'm just going to purely put XC underscore version. That should be a good first run. Now, I don't want it to necessarily run against all of my objects. So I have an inventory in here that I've named generic inventory, because I have just some generic hosts in here. So you know what? I'm going to run it against Greg Rocky 9. Now, I could leave that option to all, but I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to go ahead and set it for this one individual host really quick. I could update the limit section to Greg Rocky 9 in the job template itself. So even though the playbook is saying all, the limit section will then narrow down to other individual hosts or groups that I want to operate inside of there. But just for my quick and dirty example, I'll just do this. So I'm going to save that. Come over here to the source control menu. I'll just put in some junk. You should probably put in real messages, but when I'm developing, I'm too lazy to do that. So I just hit DD and I sync that. Now I need to add these playbooks in. So I'm going to create a project. So I'm going to click add. For the project, the name, I will make it XZ version demo. We'll call it that. I'm going to tell it to use a Git repository. Maybe it's this one. Yeah. So I've got my Git repository right here. So I'm just going to copy the URL, switch back over. Under source control, I'm going to put in that URL. Now, if this was a private repository, which is most likely the case for you, you would have to choose your credentials here. Mine, however, is just in a public Git repo. Also, while I'm developing, I like to have update revision on launch. And what that does is before I launch any piece of automation, it's going to resynchronize this project. So it's always going to make sure it's got the newest version of my playbooks in here. So while I'm iterating really quick, if I want to update the playbook, I'll run into VS Code, I'll update the playbook, and then I'll just fire the job off again, and it'll go ahead and refresh that inventory, or rather that project. So it'll go and it'll pull those new files and stick them in here. So we successfully synced. I already have credentials to connect to this host. Again, I already have that inventory that I had created, right? Because I've got all of my stuff already. So I'm going to go to the template section. This is where I'm going to tie it all together. I'll add a new job template, and we'll name it XZ version check demo. Inventory, that was going to be the generic inventory. Let me switch screens. Actually, I'll just type gen for generic. Here's my generic inventory. I'll select that. The project is going to be the one we just created. I'll just say XZ to find it really quick. There's my version demo. Select. Technically, I would normally have to hit this drop down and pick a playbook. Since there was only a single playbook in that repository, it went ahead and chose it for me. So keeps life simple. In here, I'm going to choose my credentials to connect to the server with. And technically, I'm done. Remember earlier I talked about how in my playbook itself, so in this playbook, in the host portion, I changed it from all to Greg-Rocky9. I could leave that as all in there if I wanted to, and then just in this limit section, put Greg Rocky 9. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to leave it the way it is. And I will go ahead and click save. And I will launch this. And so it should connect out to that host, pull all that information through the magic of editing, like now and through the remainder of this demo. You won't have to wait on anything. I'll just cut out the little pauses. Quick commercial break. So here at CIQ, we absolutely love helping customers build their automation environment as well as their automation practice. We have also become experts in migrating from one flavor of enterprise Linux over to another. I think you know which one is going to be my preferred for you to move to. So if you need help with enterprise Linux or migrations or automation, please give us a holler. Plus, Jimmy's getting bored and he tends to get really annoying when that happens. So I genuinely need your help to keep him busy. So drop us an email. Now that it has completed the run, I can see it ran the shell command right there. Let's have us a look-see at the output. So I'll click on it, click on JSON. It'll show me all of the output. So it's showing me, here's the XE version. And so you've got some extra information like change true, std out. And then we should have std out lines as well, right? So std out lines. I can see that I have got 2 entries in here. One's going to be the XE utils itself, and then here's the lib lzma output. And so really I only need to check one of these, and I need to check the version number in there. It's going to be 2 versions that it's going to equal to if it is a problem. So let's just match to that. Let's do that. Let's pick this statement in std out lines and match that right there. So I'm just going to kind of copy that little bit of text. Let me pop back into VS Code. And I will just put a hashtag or # there as a comment. Comment that out as well, just so I can visualize it. So let's do a little test. Let's do a little testy test on running this. So let's put a conditional on here. We'll say when, and conditionals can be put at the very bottom or put at the top. A friend of mine, Jimmy Connor, an awesome automator, he said, you know what? Some of these modules actually get really long. So if you ever look at like cloning a VMware VM, like it is insanely long. It's like 20 to 30 lines for one module call. Well, if you put a conditional at the very bottom of that, or say you have a block with several of those and you put a conditional, you're going to lose that thing. So the best practice, or maybe good practice, I try to say best practice. A good practice is to put the conditional up at the top. That way, immediately after the name, you see the conditional associated with it. Like it's only going to run if these conditions are met. So in here, let's say xz underscore version is equal to, or actually we'll say xz underscore version dot std out underscore lines. Whenever that, and we're going to say the very first iteration in that loop is equal to, and we'll just copy this right here. When it equals this, go ahead and run this task. Right, so essentially what we're doing is we're running the check up above it. You know, put a little space there to make it a little bit easier to look at. So what we're going to do is we're going to run the initial shell command that's going to generate the output. And then next, we're going to say, hey, only spit it out to screen if this thing actually meets this criteria, right? So if an std out lines, the very first line, is equal to this, we're going to have it spit out. This is actually a safe version, but for this example, we're just going to use that as our like bad version, right? So that it'll immediately show me output whether it's matching or not. Synchronize those changes. I'm going to come back in. I'm just going to fire that same job off again. That seemed to work okay. Let's try it by changing the version number and seeing if it doesn't match. See if we get a skipped condition. Come in here. I'll change it to a 4. I'll save that, and then I'll go ahead and commit that to my repository as well. So technically, it should show skipping on this now because it didn't meet like the requirements here. Didn't meet my conditional criteria. Let me fire that job off again. Now remember, it's automatically refreshing because on the project, I said update source on launch. So that means anytime I fire this piece of automation, it's actually going to go and check the repository for the newest version of the playbooks. Otherwise, I'd have to go into the project and sync every single time before I ran. Otherwise, it's not going to have that newest version of the playbook. So we have details, output, and now we see skipping, right? We saw skipping because I had changed the version numbers on there. So therefore, it didn't actually meet the criteria. So we should be good in that respect. So now I can modify my playbook a little bit. Say, let's actually make it match the versions that are actually vulnerable. So I Googled it earlier and it's 560 and 561. So I'm going to come in here and we'll say if it is 560. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy this whole line right here. I'm going to say if it's 560 or if it's 561, right? So if the utility on the output either matches 560 or 561, go ahead and perform this operation. So it'll spit it out to screen. All right. But you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to actually change this message. So I'm going to highlight that. I'm going to hit Control//. That's going to comment it out. And instead of doing a var, I'm going to do a message. And I will say, what are we going to say here? I will say double curly braces, Ansible underscore, or no, inventory underscore hostname, which is a magic variable, which essentially is whichever host I'm operating against right now, kind of like for this individual task, it gets replaced with inventory underscore hostname. So we're going to say it'll be like Greg-Rocky9 is vulnerable to the exploit. And I will spit out its version number so that you can see right on screen which version it is running. And we'll do double curly braces. So inside the message, I actually have to form it like almost any other parameter, like any other module parameter. So I've got to do double quotes and double curly braces for stuff. And so the double quotes really just live outside the entirety of the message. If I have any variables inside, all I have to do is put them in double curly braces. So it should also spit out the version that it's got in there. So it's going to say inventory hostname, blah, blah, blah. I'll go ahead and save that. And I'll just do dd commit sync. And then I will run that piece of automation again. And remember, it's going to go ahead and refresh it really quick. And now on this, again, I expect it to say skipping on that output. Now, right here, you see how it doesn't have any output. If I just click details and output again, everything pops up as it should. So I should see skipping. I really just wanted to see, did I put any syntax errors inside my playbook? If I did, it's going to pop up and it's going to give me an indication of what those were. So now let's change it to where it actually is one of the versions, because I know in my environment I don't actually have any exploited versions. So I will change this to 5.2.5 and I will save that. So now I know I'm actually going to get some interesting output here. I'm going to pop back over here. I'm going to give it a launch. So as you can see, it spit out Greg-Rocky9 is vulnerable to the exploit. So let's change the host so that it will actually gather a little bit more information. Or rather, let's change it so that it runs against multiple hosts, just so we can see kind of what it would look like in the output. Let me check in my inventory to see if I've got, let me see, generic inventory, here we are. What groups do I have in here? Well, actually, let me look at the host tab. I can see if they're both a member of an individual or a similar group. Words are tough sometimes. Let me create a group really quick just for fun. I will create one named Greg-Rocky9 group. How fun. We'll click save, and then I will add hosts. I'm going to say add existing hosts, and I'm going to add these two fellas in there. Now they're part of that group. So I will copy and paste the name of that group, and I'll put it right up here at the top. So it is the Greg Rocky 9 group that we're going to be operating against. I'll save that. Commit. Now, if I were to use the all group, that means if I want to actually change what host it's operating against, I never have to touch the playbook, right? If I do have version control and things like that, and I have to go through change procedures, I probably don't want to be changing this playbook very often. So if you leave it as all, then you can just do the limit section. And since this is really just spitting out informational stuff, it's not actually making any changes, it's pretty safe to do that. Now I could, and I've done before, I have a couple of tasks I can add at the beginning that checks to make sure that you're not running it literally against the all group, just in case you could be potentially doing some breaking changes. So it really looks to check and make sure that you're actually using the limit option in here. I'm not going to necessarily do that. I will just go with what I've got right now. So it should be running against two hosts. Let's go ahead and fire off that piece of automation again. So I'm going to come back to my Ascender. I will click on templates, and this has XZ in the title. I'll find it. I'll click the little rock ship right there, launch it off, and let's see what happens. It should be showing up on two hosts now. All right, so it ran against all of my hosts here, and you can see it showing 5.2.5. So theoretically, if this was one of the vulnerable versions, it's going to pop up in the list, right? I obviously artificially set it so that it's not one of the vulnerable versions, just so you'd have some output here. The rest would say skipping if it actually was checking for those vulnerable versions. But you can see this was a super quick and dirty way to get a report. I could literally run against my entire infrastructure looking for this information. And then I could use that for remediation as well. So I could also bake in the remediation steps. Oftentimes, it makes sense to just run a report first just to see what you're working with. If it is like a really important production machine and you're afraid you might brick something, maybe you don't necessarily want to do the remediation immediately against this thing, right? Your mileage may vary. It entirely is dependent on your situation, your scenario. Some people are in like air-gapped networks, and so it's less a big problem. So maybe just identifying those would be good to start with, and then doing the remediation after that, or just finding ones in specific environments that need remediation. Now, I said this is just doing really quick on-screen, like spit out a report right here. I actually wrote with the help of a buddy of mine, Nick. He actually created the Jinja template for me, a reporting system whereby I can have it go and collect any information from any kind of thing, and it will build a HTML report and email that to you. So it's a nice, pretty formatted table, and it automatically builds all the cool pieces. So I could do that as well. So I could have it just develop a report and put all that stuff in there with a role. I actually have a blog post showing you how to do all that stuff if you are so inclined. If you have any questions or comments, I would love to hear them. I don't think I've ever done a live demonstration of me kind of on the fly figuring things out in the playbooks. I didn't actually have to look too much up. I kept it so simple that it didn't really require me to go digging around in there. But I digress. Even people like me who work with automation all the time have to look stuff up constantly because I can't keep this stuff in my head. So here's just a quick example of doing that. Now, if you want some assistance with this stuff, us over at CIQ, our team, we are happy to assist with professional services or Ascender, this cool automation platform you see here running all this interesting stuff. It is something that we are very proud of, and we would love to help you set up a cluster or configure it or teach you to use it, or any way we can assist. Please feel free to reach out. And if nothing else, happy automating, happy, I guess, verification of your systems reporting. We'll see you next time. Bye.